A few weeks ago, I told a story about a mission trip I went on to Cookson Hills. This was the place where I had refused to wear shoes and cut my knee in the river. I've got a couple more from that trip. That was a surprisingly eventful trip. As you may recall, our group was commissioned to dismantle a mobile home. I think it was offices or something like that, but we were commissioned to demolish this entire mobile trailer. And so that whole project went really well, as I shared. We ended up actually finishing early, but we hit an interesting snag at one point. We had gotten all the way down to the subfloor. All of the walls had been removed, cabinets torn out, roof dismantled, all that stuff, and we were down to the subfloor. We were looking at the frame of the trailer, which was a large, a couple long I-beams underneath to support the weight of the trailer, and then there were these horizontal fins that you would rest the floor joists on. That sort of like the rafters in a ceiling, the joists in the floor, holds up the floor horizontally. And they had run these lag bolts up into the floor joists from underneath, and we were trying to figure out how to take those floor joists off so that we could get down to the bare metal of the trailer. So someone suggested, of course, we take a socket and we undo all those lag bolts all the way up and down, and it's that's going to take a million years. So we were looking for a different solution. So somebody got the bright idea to take a sledgehammer on one side, and they used the sledgehammer with the hammer head down like this, and they were able to punch holes through the subfloor because it was a little bit wet. So they walked all the way down the length of both joists, punching holes through the subfloor like this. And we were able to get the subfloor cracked all the way along both sides of the floor joist, and then we got a crowbar in one side of the joist and created a little space. And my brother, who's a big dude, he got a hold of that floor joist and just ripped it up off the frame. It's an impressive feat of strength, but it required that we had to cut the subfloor across both sides. And he was able to just tear that thing right up with a couple big heaves. And we thought, all right, if we can cut through the subfloor all the way down, all the way up and down all of these floor joists, he will, or someone will be able to grab hold of this and just rip them off, and then we can save essentially the whole afternoon. So we did that, and I was one of the people given a sledgehammer, and was told, go ahead and knock out the subfloor. And so on the one side, they had nice, wet, soft subfloor that they could poke through like this with the tip of the hammer, essentially just using the weight of the hammer. On the side I started on the far end of the trailer, it was still dry. So it was wood. I mean, I just had to break through wood. Well, that required overhand swings, and I was essentially punching a 8-pound hammer head in the subfloor along the way, and it was taking forever. So I created this technique, and I thought, this is awesome, where I would take the hammer and I would wind up, huge, John Henry type swing, do this big wind up and swing it down at about this angle so that when it would hit, the handle would just carry through and just rip through long ways, and I was essentially cutting the hammer handle's length of subfloor on every swing. I thought, this is so awesome. So I'm bragging to my brother. I'm check it out. I'm going twice as fast as those people on the wet end, and I've got the hard side. And he just casually was like, you're putting a lot of pressure on that handle. I think you might break that handle if you keep doing that. I was like, nonsense, and I just keep doing these big swings, and I'm busting through. I get through probably 5 or 6 of them, and it's holding up okay. And then, of course, one big, mighty John Henry swing, and the hammerhead just rips right down to the ground. And I'm looking at it through there, and I'm like, well, where can I hide this? So, of course, as was almost always the case, my brother was right, and I had to, go tell Jason, who was the guy running our trip. I was like, hey, Jason, I'm sorry, man. I broke the handle, and I was like, I had to confess I was abusing the tool. I was not using it correctly. But look at all the subfloor that I busted out. It was really working until that moment when it really, really wasn't. And he was like, yeah, man, it's okay. I've got some extra handles. I can go fix that up. And I just was feeling bad about that. I was warned, and I didn't listen. So later in that trip, after I had broken the hammer handle, after I had cut my knee, Jason was feeling pretty sorry for me. So there was this one time, and I've been thinking about it quite a lot, and I can't actually remember the details of what led up to this, but we were all sort of standing around at free time. And I can't remember if it was right after breakfast or after the workday had finished, but we didn't have anywhere to be, and my family was just standing around chatting about stuff. And he comes rolling up on a three-wheeler because he probably just used it to get around the property or something, but it was the first time I had seen him on it. And he rolls up and just says, "Hey, how you guys doing?" And I was like, "Can I drive the three-wheeler?" And I think he was feeling bad for me because I was having, some ups and downs, but mostly downs that week with the stuff that had been happening. So he was like, "Yeah, you ever ride something like this before?" And I was like, "Yeah, my family's got a quad runner and I drive it around all the time." It's like, it won't be a big deal. And he says, "Okay, sure, go ahead, the keys are in it." So I go over there and I quickly realize the quad runner my family has is automatic. In fact, I don't even know that it has gears. I think it's just push the throttle and go, and that was it. And this three-wheeler was a manual transmission. I did not know a lot about those differences other than just when it starts to sound like it's working really hard, you should shift up. That's what I knew about transmissions, about manual transmission. So I hop on there, and there's a pretty good stretch of just like wide open field that I can drive through, and the grass was low, so it wasn't like the view was obstructed, so my family and him are just standing around chatting, and they're kind of watching me. So I hop on the three-wheeler, and I'm remembering my training, which was very little, and I hit the gas just like I would on our quad runner. And it starts, the engine starts to whine a little bit, so I kick up the shifter with the foot and kick it into second, and it pops on me a little bit, and it starts going. I'm like, "Oh yeah," confidence through the roof. I just peg the throttle, kick it up into third with a full head of steam, and I pulled this huge wheelie. And it felt like the length of a football field. I mean, it probably was only, 20 yards or something, but I popped that wheelie, and I held it for a long time. And I got scared at first, but then immediately did the middle schooler transition, was like, "That was awesome." So I turned around to come back the other way. Unbeknownst to me, there was a conversation going on between Jason and my dad. And Jason saw that and was like, "Wow, he's a pretty experienced rider, isn't he?" And my dad was like, "No, it's the first time he's ever been on a three-wheeler." And he goes, his eyes get all big, and he goes out in the field. He's flagging me down. I drive back over. He goes, okay, I hope that was fun. That's probably all the more we're going to have you drive that around, though. And I was like, in the moment, I was like, "Oh, that's too bad." But I was like, "No, I get it. Like, you saw what I just did, and you thought that's probably not a safe thing for you to do. You already cut your leg. There's probably no need to push the envelope." So I've got this question then. I come away from these experiences and I think back on all that, and it's funny, it's memorable. And really, that trip is so memorable. Out of all the stories I could tell, I told 3 stories from that one trip. And I had to ask myself the question while I was thinking through these stories, why did I go on that trip? Why did I go there? And as I reflected on that question, it became pretty clear. It was a family vacation. It was a working vacation, but I went with my family on a family vacation. Please turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 11. I'm going to come back to the family vacation. I'm going to come back to the fun. But first I want to spend a little bit of time in the scripture. 2 Corinthians 11, I'm going to do something unusual. I am going to pull this out of context. And I hope you all are cringing a little and going, "Oh, that's really uncharacteristic of Todd," and not going, "Yeah, that happens all the time." But this passage is about Paul defending his authority, defending his apostleship, and he's comparing himself to false teachers. And there's a whole rhetorical argument that's unfolding over the course of multiple chapters. But I'm going to read a small segment. I'm going to read it somewhat out of context with a very specific goal. I really just want to read about the things that he said he's been through without engaging with his broader argument at all. So let's read that, and then I'll explain what I mean here. 2 Corinthians 11, verses 24 through 28. Verse 24. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at the sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all of the churches. Despite the fact that this is a list that is part of a rhetorical argument that Paul is trying to make against false teachers, I want to just identify the things that he talked about. Even though it is part of an argument and he is referencing these situations somewhat sarcastically, I'm inclined to think that they did actually happen and that he's recounting things that did take place. And so I have to ask myself, how much fun did Paul seem to have on his missionary journeys? And we go, okay, but he's basically our living martyr. That guy is an outlier in a lot of ways. He did a lot of crazy stuff. Maybe Paul's unique. Maybe most mission trips don't actually look like that. Maybe sharing the gospel is actually really cushy and easy, and it's about like pulling a wheelie on a three-wheeler. So let me ask you this. Acts chapter 5, verses 41 and 42. How did these guys fare? The apostles, and here we're talking about Peter and the rest of the apostles, and not Paul. The apostles left the Sanhedrin, rejoicing because they had been counted worthy of suffering disgrace for the name. Day after day in the temple courts and from house to house, they never stopped teaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. Well, I'm a little trapped now, because every time I read about missionary efforts in Acts in particular, but in the scriptures, it's accompanied by suffering. There's not an awful lot of fun going around. It's hard. People get imprisoned. People get beaten with sticks, hit with rocks, shipwrecked, and washed up the river. And you're all somewhat acquainted with my story, so you know I was baptized, and then there was this long era where I wasn't really living it, and it was late in high school when I was at a church camp. I got a call to ministry, and that was sort of when everything began for me. I finally made Jesus my Lord in deed and not just in word. So my motives at this point, when I was in middle school, post-baptism, but dare I say, conversion, my motives for going on this trip were threefold. I wanted to have fun. Second, I wanted to have a family vacation. So my parents and my brother were there. They wanted to go. They wanted me to go, so I wanted to go with them. And lastly, I won't expand on this too much, there was a girl that was going that I was interested in. I thought it might be a good opportunity to spend some time with her. That didn't work out, if you're curious. So I tell you all of this in order to introduce this concept that I think is important and is starting to gain some traction in the Christian community. So some of you may have even heard of this already. I'm just going to dub this whole concept "when helping hurts." And this is based on a book that was written by a couple guys, Steve Corbett. I think I'm going to pronounce these names wrong. Steve Corbett and Brian Fikert. You can look them up online. They popularized this idea of short-term mission trips sometimes doing more harm than good. And I find that really interesting because on that trip, I was not there for the right reasons. I don't know that that equates to doing more harm than good, but I do know that that equates to there was nothing about me being there that was about sharing the gospel. And when helping hurts is a concept that I'm not going to be able to fully unpack here because there's so much that we can talk about in terms of how our activities affect local economies, how our activities might represent, rather than the infusion of cash that we hope they represent, that what they actually do is put a bunch of people out of work, and those sorts of things in foreign mission and even really in local mission. We have to be somewhat careful and strategic about missionary efforts, otherwise our helping could end up hurting. We have to do research. We have to ask locals. We have to be in touch with the community enough to know that the thing that we hope to do is actually a useful thing or a thing worth doing. And I'm going to talk about this over the course of, as long as I'm here. So you're going to be hearing about that for 40 years. You can deal with that. Sorry. But my story that I just shared is a story about going on mission trips for the wrong reasons. There's a there's a different element of that, and I'm going to transition there now. I've got a story from someone else and a story of my own. And the story from somebody else, I want to just read their version of it, because I've got this firsthand account of this young lady who went on a mission trip to Tanzania to visit an orphanage. And this has become a really infamous story among mission studies, and it's sort of become the go-to story for why we need to be careful about what we're doing and why we're doing it, frankly. But what we're doing is what's emphasized in this story. So here's her account. Our mission while at the orphanage was to build a library. Turns out that we, a group of highly educated private boarding school students, were so bad at the most basic construction work that each night the men had to take down the structurally unsound bricks we had laid and rebuild the structure, so that when we woke up in the morning, we would be unaware of our failure. It is likely that this was a daily ritual. Our mixing cement and laying bricks for 6+ hours, them undoing our work after the sunset, relaying the bricks, and then acting as if nothing had happened so that the cycle could continue. Out of curiosity, how many of you have heard that story or a story like that? Yeah, just a few. The thing that strikes me about that is that the trip that she went on became a trip that was ministering to her. Her helping hurt. She showed up completely unaware of how to lay brick and attempted to lay brick for people who needed a building that would stand, not people who needed somebody to go assuage their guilt for a while. They needed an actual building. They needed a library that they could put books in that would be kept safe, because books are a precious commodity in an impoverished area of the world. They needed a place for children to go to be kept safe. The walls would not cave in on them when they were in this building. And so the skilled locals who actually knew how to lay bricks in the intense heat in Tanzania did the work, while they got to then take the credit for it and feel good about themselves and go back to the States and talk about what a great job they did building a library, and everybody pats everybody on the back and we all feel good. And in this specific situation, it would have been better had they not gone, because they created more work than they did. I got another one. There was another mission trip. I went on this mission trip in early high school. And this was a trip that it was also a work trip, just like the Cookson Hills trip was. And this was a trip to the mountains in Kentucky. And it was interesting what we ended up doing there. Well, let me get to that in a second. Let me talk about motive. So the reason I decided to go on this trip, I found out that one of the guys from our church, who is a building contractor, was going to go. And I thought to myself, if he's going to be there and I can get on his team, he might be able to see my work ethic or my skill and offer me a job. And so I thought, this is going to be the best week-long job interview I've ever had. And so I went on this mission trip to Kentucky, and we found out when we got there we were going to be doing a lot of like shovel work, like moving dirt and moving mulch and spreading mulch. And I thought, this is perfect. This is hard work. It's good work to display my endurance, and also I can show that I'm competent with tools. This will be perfect. So we got down there, and effectively what we were doing was we had to create an access ramp down off the steep pitches of one of these mountains to a house. And this house had an elderly lady living at it, and so ambulance needed access to be able to get to her in an emergency. So we were creating this long ramp from the road where an ambulance, or I guess a pair of paramedics with a stretcher could get down there and get her out and back up to the ambulance on the road, because it was this weird like street parking situation with kind of a steep staircase, and it's kind of hard to describe because we don't live in the mountains, but we're talking about on the side of a mountain. There was just a house, and above that was a road, and we were building this access ramp kind of almost like laterally across the mountain so that they could get to this house. And before we had gotten there, they had what I can only assume is like a big end loader kind of dig out, like rough cut a ramp for us. And our job was to come in and smooth it out and lay mulch over it so that nothing would grow there and it would remain an open ramp so that people could access. And it was great because the ground was really hard. They had carved it out with this big machinery, so we're not dealing with topsoil here. We're dealing with like mountain. And so we had a pickaxe and then a few shovels. I, of course, raced immediately for the pickaxe because I'm eager to prove myself and I want to show, how hulking strong I am. Do you know how many axe handles I can break? Like whatever, dumb kid. So I get the pickaxe and it's going really well. I'm the guy who's working up above the crew below me while they've got a wheelbarrow and shovels and they're moving things around, and I'm pickaxing out the high spots in order to get everything broken up so that we can move it. And I could tell that I was working ahead of them because I had to every once in a while set the pickaxe down, pick up a shovel, and help them catch up. So I'm like, snap the suspenders kid, like, yeah, this is going great. And a couple times the contractor commented like, wow, man, I'm working really hard. And I'm like, yes, I'm going to get a job for sure. This is perfect. And so everything was going wonderfully. And I was, doing my John Henry pickaxe swing. And, working up the side of the mountain, you're kind of like standing here, but your workspace is like here because it's this steep pitch that you're working up. And so I wind up to take a big swing at a relatively unbroken patch after I just picked up the pickaxe. And I go up here and I kind of position myself so I'm not going to fall backwards. And I take this big swing and hit, and all of a sudden I'm drenched in water. And I didn't know what to do. I just turned and looked at the other guys, and I'm just getting sprayed with water. And I'm like, what is going on? And they look up and they go, oh, did you hit the water main? And I'm like, either that or something really interesting is happening here. So we went up to the road and we found where the shutoff was. We got it shut off. And we repaired that little segment that had busted where I hit it. I did hit the water main. That is what happened. And it was near the surface because they had dug it out with this big end loader, And we replaced that section, turned the water back on, and one of the guys went in the house to see how the water pressure was doing. It took 15 minutes to fill the toilet tank. There was no water pressure. We have no idea how to fix this. And so we finished laying mulch and we went home, because that was what we came to do. I have no idea if she ever got her water pressure back. Didn't even think to ask, really. That's not why I was there. I was there to get a job. He hired me. It was good. I worked with him for a little while, but it was relatively unskilled labor still. I was pretty young, so he hired me to help him move a cast iron bathtub out of a bathroom and some other things, and then he just went back to working like he was before, because who needs a kid hanging around, My mission was accomplished. I came there to do a very specific thing, and I accomplished that thing, and now this elderly lady who we're so worried about that we're building a ramp so an ambulance can get to her might not have water pressure in her house. And we left. To this day, I don't know. I don't know if she's got water or not. I don't know how that panned out. I don't even know who I would ask. I'm not sure. I don't even remember what the missionary organization was called that we were with. I don't know. I'm terribly curious, but I'm not sure how I would even find out. So that's a sad story. I've shared a lot of sad stories, so I have to ask some questions. Does this mean that we are not allowed to enjoy mission work? Does this mean that we're not allowed to enjoy sharing the gospel at all? Does this mean that mission work didn't get accomplished unless we suffered? And of course, the short answer to all these things is no, absolutely not. Mission trips will often, by their very nature, be enjoyable. Serving people is when you often feel most in touch with humanity, your own and others, and you really don't have any choice but to come away from that experience enriched. Similarly, the apostles, when they left the Sanhedrin after being imprisoned, went away rejoicing that they considered themselves worthy to suffer for the name. You'd be hard-pressed to do mission work and not enjoy it. What I want to try and draw your attention to is the why you might go and the what you might do. Because feeling fulfilled or enjoying yourself, those to me are foregone conclusions. And often they're the selling points. They're sort of the reason that we want people to go, or the ways that we convince people that they ought to take the time or spend the money to do a mission project of some sort. I think those things are completely tertiary. In fact, I imagine that the most meaningful mission experience of your life will be the one you go on where everything goes horribly wrong, you get pushed out of your comfort zone, and you come home with a bunch of horror stories. In a way, I'm thankful I haven't had that experience, but I almost regret that too. I'd love to be able to speak to you out of my experience about how, I went to this place at a time that I completely didn't want to be at, and I suffered and was imprisoned, and the gospel spread because of it. I don't have that story. And perhaps I should. I don't know what to do with that, I suppose. But let me, amidst the doom and gloom, the warnings, let me give you some signs of hope and talk to you a little bit about what's going on here. There's a couple missionary efforts that I want to name by name and just explore them a little bit with you. The first one is Casas por Cristo. And so, in a nutshell, Casas por Cristo is Spanish for houses for Christ. In a nutshell, that mission identifies people who don't have homes through local churches, local pastors in the local community, or their homes are so dilapidated that they're dangerous, and they go send a group down to build a house for them to live in, and then they just give them that house. So here is the infrastructure for that organization. First of all, you get paired with somebody who's competent in construction work. Our person is Justin Kirkland. A lot of you know him personally as you've been on this trip. He knows how to build a house, so when he's there supervising, we're not going to build a shoddy structure that's going to fall down. He actually ensures that there's a level of quality, a standard of quality that's met so that no one is in any danger and no one has to come in behind us and redo the work that we've done. The other thing is, Justin has some personal connections, but the organization has connections with the local pastors in the area so that there is, for lack of a better term, evangelistic follow-up. It's not some weird fire and forget thing where we send a group down there and build a house and we just kind of disappear and woo, we feel good. We assuaged our guilt. We served. We did something, and we had fun in the process. It becomes much more than that because this service that is offered by the people that we send becomes a tool, or if not a platform, for the local pastors to be able to share the gospel with that family and with other families. Because they are already positioned within the community, knowing the people, knowing their situations, knowing their first names, for crying out loud, and they can say, this is what the love of God is like. They can ask questions like, what did you do to deserve this house? Well, in the same way, we don't deserve Christ's love. And people come to know the Lord because somebody deigns to go down and build a house. And there's a robust and elaborate infrastructure in order to connect the service to the mission. And I hold that up as an example. I mean, there's no perfect mission, I'm sure, right? We're all kind of struggling to work it out and do our best. But I hold that up as an example because of how starkly it contrasts with the story that I read about the incompetent builders who tried to build a building. But also because it's near and dear to a lot of you. There's a lot of you who've been on those trips and you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm sure that you don't love carrying buckets of cement around, but being willing to do that does something to you. And it accomplishes something useful and semi-permanent in another area. Certainly feels permanent for those who inhabit the newly constructed building. The other mission effort I want to talk to you about is called Impact Kalamazoo. And this is a new one. This one is coming up this year, in fact, August 6th through the 12th. It is mostly designed to be a youth excursion, so I don't want to mislead you in this way. There will be some adult supervision where we will send some adults and we'll send some tools and things like that to go with the youth who are going on this trip. But the goal and mission of Impact Kalamazoo is to do things here in this community through connections where people in the community are in touch with needs, right? It's not, man, it would be really nice if those people had a playground over there, so we just sort of force them to have a playground that we go and build. I agree, Zia. It's wonderful. We actually have a direct line to the community through people who live in the community who can communicate needs, and then we just send a gaggle of youth supervised by some adults to go off and meet those needs. And it's not the soapbox, we're yelling at them the whole time we're there, you need to follow Jesus. We hope that this creates an opportunity to share why we're doing it and what we're doing, and this is good for the kids, it's good for us, it's good for the community, and this is what Jesus was like. He served people who didn't deserve it but needed it, and he went out of his way to make sure that people had needs met, and we're just going to do that. And I don't know a ton about Impact Kalamazoo, having not been on one of their trips, and we haven't worked with them yet, but I can tell you that Eric has been in communication with them over a period of a year or so, been pursuing that for about a year. So please talk to Eric. I mean, I can answer probably some basic questions. Eric's the one who's in the know, and he's getting the trip organized. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to go as one of the supervisors and sponsors in August. And this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about, is we can connect to actual people and to actual needs instead of this generic, we want to not feel guilty about having things, so we're going to go to a place and we're going to build things. It can be more than that if it can connect to real people and if it can connect in real ways. This whole sermon essentially just serves as an introduction to a really complex topic. When helping hurts is something that's going to come back around. It's basically all I'm going to be able to talk about whenever missions come up for the next umpteen million years. Because we need to be critical of ourselves and not say, this seems like a thing that they could benefit from. We need to be willing to actually ask them, whoever the them is, people in the Dominican, Casas por Cristo, people in Kenya that I visited a couple years ago, people in Kalamazoo. We ask them, what do you need? And then we do it, even if it sounds boring or unrewarding or unfulfilling or something like that, because that's what mission work is. It's not a really expensive vacation where we also get to feel good about ourselves. Mission work is about sharing the gospel, which in the scriptures usually involves suffering. In fact, I might dare to say almost exclusively involves suffering. Let's be critical of ourselves. Let's evaluate our motives and let's evaluate our missions and make sure that we are sharing Christ in a way that would be honoring to Christ and not destroying local economies and putting local craftsmen out of business. Let's pray over that goal. God, we pray for the discernment that is only available through your Spirit. And we pray that you would speak to us loudly and clearly about what missions to support, how we can help, and how we can really share the good news of your Son, Jesus Christ. And help us not to get caught up in our own guilt over the things that we have, or the time that we have, or the money that we have. But God, make us effective ministers to your kingdom. Make us effective witnesses to your truth. And may we never have to have our buildings deconstructed and reconstructed by someone who knows better. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.